Hey you guys, what's up? In today's video, I'm going to be testing out the brand new Colourpop Roaring Hearts palette. This is a holiday launch for them. In today's video, I'm going to be comparing this palette to some of my other palettes that have similar color stories to this one. I'll be showing you guys swatches, and I'm also going to be creating this look for you guys. So I hope you guys are all excited about today's video. If you are, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you're not already. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to show you guys is close-ups and swatches of the Roaring Hearts palette. So this is the Colourpop Roaring Hearts palette, and this is a stunning 10-pan palette. It is a warm-toned, kind of like everyday glam type of palette. First of all, I love the packaging. I love how this palette is set up. It is a pretty basic color story, so before we do the comparisons to some other palettes, let's go ahead and swatch the shades in this one. First, we have the shade Fancy That. This is a stunning, almost like white gold shade. This will be beautiful in the inner corner. Next is Lost Gen. Nightlife. Pour Another. Cafe Society. Foxtrot. Phonograph. That Sax. Lindy Hop. And Grand Dame. So here is the palette swatched. Obviously, this is a gorgeous palette. I do feel like most of you guys probably already have these shades in other palettes, since these are pretty, like, I don't know, standard shades for a warm tone type of like glam palette for every day. So we're going to compare some other palettes that have similar shades to this one, just to see if you guys really need to pick up this palette. So we're going to start with Colourpop palettes to compare, and my Going Coconuts palette is like so dirty and just looks terrible, but I'm going to show you guys some of the shades because this has a similar color story. There are warm tone shades in this palette, but they are kind of like everyday type of shades. Here is a little side-by-side look at these two palettes. So here are the Roaring Hearts shades, and then I did swatch a few shades from Going Coconuts. As you can see, there are some similar shades from this palette that you can also find in Roaring Hearts. So if you have Going Coconuts, you probably don't need to pick up Roaring Hearts unless you wanted some deeper shades, because this palette obviously has deeper shades than the Going Coconuts palette, but there are some shades that are pretty similar between the two. Next up, I grabbed Bare Necessities, which is like the perfect type of palette for everyday warm toned shades. I'm pretty sure I can find most, if not all of the shades in Bare Necessities that are in Roaring Hearts, so I'm probably only going to swatch a few just to show you guys. So if you have Bare Necessities, I doubt you need Roaring Hearts. Here is Bare Necessities next to Roaring Hearts. Okay, I literally started swatching up like my whole arm, because I found shades that pretty much match all of the shades from Roaring Hearts. So here are the Bare Necessities shades. You can see that they are very, very similar to Roaring Hearts. There's only like a slight difference between some of these shades. I hope you guys can see okay. I'm sorry, I really had to just go up my arm. So if you guys have Bare Necessities, you definitely don't need to get Roaring Hearts as well. I just feel like they're too similar. But if you don't want Bare Necessities because it is such a big palette, you'll probably really like Roaring Hearts because it is smaller, easier to travel with, easier to store. So the last Colourpop palette that we're going to compare is Lust for Dusk, which is a newer Colourpop palette. Here are the palettes next to each other. So here are some Lust for Dusk shades that are even like kind of similar to Roaring Hearts, but I feel like Lust for Dusk has a few that are similar, but you definitely don't get like the same color story or tones that you have in Roaring Hearts. So yeah, just in case any of you guys have Lust for Dusk and you were curious if it was similar to this new palette. So now we're going to compare Soft Glam. I did want to include some high-end palettes that are probably similar to this new Colourpop palette in case you have any of these palettes. Here are these two palettes next to each other. Alright, so here's Roaring Hearts, and here are some swatches of shades from the Soft Glam palette. These are obviously pretty similar palettes, but I do have to say that some of the shades in the Colourpop palette I like better. I like these shimmery shades from the Colourpop palette much more than I like the shimmery shades from the Anastasia palette. I just feel like these are a lot more metallic, but yeah, if you already have Soft Glam, you probably don't need this new Roaring Hearts palette unless you wanted like a cheaper alternative to Soft Glam, or if you've been eyeing Soft Glam and you don't want to spend $42 on a palette, then Roaring Hearts is probably a good palette for you. And lastly, we're going to compare one more high-end palette. I feel like this is a palette that a lot of people own because it's the perfect kind of everyday palette, and I feel like there are some similar shades in this palette to Roaring Hearts. Here are the two palettes next to each other. So here are swatches from the Too Faced palette. There are a few shades that are pretty similar to Roaring Hearts. So once again, if you already have this palette, you definitely don't need the new Colourpop one, or if you've been wanting the Too Faced one, the Colourpop one is a great, cheaper alternative. So now we're going to move over into the demo part of the video where I'm going to create this eye look for you guys. So the first shade that I'm going to go in with is this dark brown over here. I did go ahead and prime both of my lids, and I'm just going to kind of map out the shape of my crease, just the usual type of look. And I just like to be able to control how I want the shape to start off. I feel like that just helps the rest of the blending later on when we have a nice shape to go off. As usual, this is good pigmentation. Colourpop eyeshadows are amazing, so it's never really anything about the quality whenever I try out their palettes, because let's be real, their quality is amazing, especially for the price. They definitely have some of my favorite eyeshadows, if not my favorite. They probably do have like my favorite eyeshadow formula. So this is really just to show you guys whether or not you need this palette, since it is a pretty basic color story. So next I'm going to take this brown, which is more of a warm toned brown, and I just picked up like a little bit of it because I have a feeling it's going to be super pigmented. And I'm just going to kind of really tightly blend this along the lash shade, trying to keep the shape the same. This is gonna look like super messy until we pretty much finish the eye look, so just keep that in mind because it looks pretty bad from the beginning. Now I'm gonna grab the shade right here called Pour Another, and I'm just gonna do the same thing once again, just lightly blending above the lash shade that we put down. Now I'm going to take the shade called Foxtrot, and this is going to be the lash shade that I use to blend up with, and I'm just going to be like super light-handed with this shade and just very lightly blend above the lash shade that I put down. So I went ahead and cut my crease off camera. I just took a little tiny brush with some concealer and kind of just drew out the shape that I wanted my lid to be. And it doesn't have to be perfect because we are going to add some shimmery shades on top now. So first I'm going to pick up the shade Fancy That, and I'm just going to put this on the inner part of my lid. This is such a gorgeous shade. It looks like white in the palette, but it's more of like a gold because it has like the gold glitter in it. It's kind of like a duochrome shade. I think I'm actually gonna kind of bring this out maybe halfway. I think we're just gonna do 2 shades on the lid today just to keep it more simple. Normally I would do like 3, but I don't know, I just kind of want to do 2 because the shade is so pretty. So I'm going to bring it out about halfway. Now I'm going to take this darker gold shade and I'm just going to apply this all over the rest of the lid. There is a little bit of fallout with this shade. I feel like it's not as creamy as that first shade. It's a little bit more of a drier formula. So now we just need to take that dark brown that was on the outer corner and just slowly blend this along the edge of the outer shimmery shade to blend everything together. I'm also going to add that dark brown right up against the lower lash line. I'm going to use the same shades that I used in my crease on the lower lash line, and I'm going to keep the darkest shades closest to the lash line, and then I'm going to blend outwards with the lighter shades. Alright you guys, so here is the completed look with the Roaring Hearts palette. I really like the way that the look turned out. This is definitely like my go-to type of glam look. That's, I don't know, not too much. I love gold all over the lid. I love the warm toned browns in the crease. The shadows, of course, performed amazing. I mean, it's a Colourpop palette. I never have any issues with their palettes, like ever. So I really like the color story, but once again, as I said, it is just kind of like your basic warm toned, like everyday type of palette. You can do daytime looks with this palette, nighttime looks with this palette. It is a nice size. Love the packaging. So do you guys need this palette? That really depends on whether or not you have any of the other palettes that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. If you have any of those palettes, then you probably don't need this palette. I'm sure most of you guys probably already have a color story like this besides the palettes that I showed in this video. Those are just the closest palettes that I personally have to this one. I feel like this is a pretty standard type of color story, but I do feel like a lot of people will like this because it does have those pretty like warm toned browns in here. This is just a really nice color story to have in your collection. So if you've been eyeing a Colourpop palette with this type of color story, you'll probably really like this one. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about this palette in the comments down below. I always love to hear your thoughts. I hope this video was helpful for you guys. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you're not already. Also make sure you have your notifications turned on, that way you don't miss out on any of my future videos. All you have to do is click the bell next to the subscribe button, and then you'll receive a notification every time I upload a new video. And I will see you guys in my next video. Thank you so much for watching.